Sounds good.
You're live.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We will start in a couple minutes. Let's just give people another minute to join. Okay, let's start it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to CDW Microsoft webinar. Today's topic, CDW and Microsoft 365 Defender, investigating security incidents. My name is Jacqueline. I'm going to be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this webinar through Microsoft Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. Today's webinar conference is being recorded on behalf of the CDW Canada. By participating in this section using Microsoft Teams, your name and email address may be viewable by other participants. If you do not consider to be part of our recorded session, please disconnect at this time. The webinar recording will be made available within 5 to 7 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. Our team members will be responding to your questions throughout the section. I'd like to thank you for your patience during these announcements. Now on to the main event. Presenting for us today from CDW, we have Senior Sales Manager Matthew Atwood, and we have our Security Solution Architect David Izard. With any further delay, Matthew, David, welcome and thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks, Jacqueline, and good afternoon, everyone. As Jacqueline said, I'm Matt Edwards, Senior Manager at CDW Canada, and thanks for joining us today for the session on investigating security incidents with Microsoft Defender 365. Very pleased to be joined by David Izard, who is a Senior Cybersecurity Expert at CDW. And before we begin, I just want to mention, CDW is a leading technology solutions partner providing cloud and security services for our corporate and public sector customers across Canada, the United States, and globally through our UK office. We have a trusted relationship with Microsoft for over 25 years, and as a global gold partner and Azure expert MSP, we provide a comprehensive array of solutions across the Microsoft technology stack. CDW's expertise runs deep across the portfolio, and with our solution architects team, our service delivery experts, and our licensing specialists, we are well positioned to help our customers with any Microsoft-related project. And with that, I will turn things over to David.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Appreciate it much. My name is David Izard. As they have said before, I'm a Senior Solutions Security Architect here with CDW. I'll be doing this presentation today as we're going to be going through investigating a security incident within the Defender platform. Just a very quick housekeeping note before we go on. If you do have questions, you can certainly post them in the chat. There's a lot to cover in this webinar. We only have an hour, actually 55 minutes from this point going forward, so it's likely we will not get to answering those questions. However, we will send out a follow-up email to other participants with the questions that everybody has asked, as well as their answers either sometime later on today or tomorrow. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up there. Okay, so let's dive in. Before we actually get into the console, I want to give an overview of the environment that we've set up for this demonstration and how we actually do an investigation. So what we have set up for this presentation is we do have a full simulated corporate environment that's running an Active Directory domain. We call it CDW Test Lab, and it is, of course, connected to Azure Active Directory with the password #sync. These are M365, E5, and E3 licenses that we're demonstrating here today, although we're using Defender across all of the endpoints. We have 2 victim servers that we have stood up for this particular webinar. One victim server 1, one victim server 2, and the way in which we've designed those two, and we'll get into this in a second, is they're set to different device groups within the Defender, one that's running an automated investigation and one that's not, and that's just so that we can show the differences there, okay? To simulate the attack, we're actually using MITRE Caldera, which is an open source platform. You guys are welcome to go and download it from MITRE. It's a way of actually testing your security tools. So it's a security testing or security control testing platform. We're leveraging that today to go ahead and basically simulate a reverse shell out and running some commands to do some exfiltration of passwords in this instance. And then we, of course, have this evil FTP server that we are leveraging as well. Now, what you're going to see in this environment, all of these IP addresses that you'll see, because you're going to see this through the console, they're actually going to be on the same private network in the 10 space. The MITRE Caldera, just to facilitate the ease of actually launching the attacks, is actually sitting on the same subnet, but the evil FTP server is actually sitting in a different subnet, and so you will see that actually flagged as a suspicious activity, where for the MITRE Caldera you won't. But that's actually a good thing, because we want to be able to show where, even though you've done an automatic investigation and maybe it's been remediated by Defender, there is still work to do as a security ops that you need to do in order to ensure that you fully remediate that instance. So actually, we're going to demonstrate that today. Just a quick note about how the environment is set up. We have removed a ton of the security controls in this environment, so a lot of this stuff will run, right? Mimikatz is typically going to be caught by an antivirus or real-time protection, for example. A lot of the behavioral stuff that we're going to be doing, like outbound connection calls or whatnot, are going to be allowed through because we don't have things like attack surface reduction rules configured on these endpoints. We also, these endpoints are deliberately unpatched and they don't have their viruses updated, so they're designed so that we can actually get these events into the Defender platform, so we can actually go through a full investigation. We also, for Excel, because we're going to be using Excel as basically as a dropper, we've enabled Excel basically to run with macros enabled, no notification, protected view disabled. So basically, it's just going to run. Okay. From the user's perspective, there's actually 5 users that are involved in this attack, but there's only actually 2 that we're going to be focusing on primarily, and that's going to be the E5 user 1 and E3 user 1. Okay. Now, both of these users are local admins, and we call them click happy because, of course, you're going to get notifications when you do any type of thing that's going to be elevated. So in this instance, what we're simulating is them just clicking away. Hopefully, in your environments, you don't have admins that are doing that. From a Defender, for endpoint perspective, we have 2 device groups specifically configured for, or endpoint groups specifically configured for this lab. One where there's no auto investigation and one where there is an auto investigation. For the auto investigation, we've actually got full remediation turned on. And then for the non-investigation, because no investigation is actually happening, there is no remediation. What it's going to show you is that the data is still there for you to do a manual investigation, but no automated investigation has actually happened. Whereas with, and you can see victim server 1 there, the auto investigation is enabled. So a lot of things are going to be investigated automatically by Defender and then remediated. Again, not everything's going to be remediated. We're doing this in such a way so you can see that you need to take other steps and that you can take those other steps when you're investigating incident. Last but not least, for Defender for Office 365, both the E5 user 1 and E3 user 1 users have been exempted from safe attachments policies and safe anti-malware policies, and that's so that email that we're going to send is actually going to get in. Otherwise, it would actually be caught by, and you'll actually see that in the investigation where it's actually caught for the other users. Okay. Let me just give you an overview of the attack, and then we'll dive in. Okay, so what we're going to do here, or what you're going to see have happened, is that we'll send an email from a malicious email address. In this case, it's just a Gmail address, and you'll see that in a second, with a malicious email attachment. Okay, and when that attachment is opened, a macro is going to automatically run, which is going to create and execute 2 PowerShell scripts, and the intent there is to spawn an elevated PowerShell session, which will then basically serve as a dropper to download a malicious agent to create an outbound HTTP tunnel, so that we're going to have now an elevated access directly to the victim endpoints. We're then going to use Caldera, because that's where the agent is going to be running, to issue a series of commands to the victim machines, which are going to download and extract Mimikatz, dump the passwords to a file, and then FTP them, so exfiltrate those passwords to our malicious FTP server. Okay, now the way in which Defender operates is that it's a great tool. It's going to collect and aggregate and correlate all the events into an incident, which is fantastic. But it's also because we're doing an automated investigation. Some of the actions that we want to be able to demonstrate here, like, for example, collecting an investigation package or doing a live response session, need to wait until the automated investigation has completed. As a result, what we're going to do things in a little bit of a reverse order here. We've got an active incident that we simulated yesterday so that we could get all the data into the environment. We could walk through what investigating that incident looks like. Assuming we get through all that, including the live session, what I'll do is I will then resolve that incident, and then I will show you the actual attack kind of going forward, where the user is going to click on the attachment and open it. That reverse shell is going to come out, and we'll launch those PowerShell commands through Caldera. So I will show that at the end if there's time, so that you can see that there's actually a live simulated actual instant. But again, in the interest of time and making sure we get through the important stuff, which is doing the investigation, we're going to shift that to the end. And if there's not time, we could potentially do a later session or just record something on the end of this session so that you guys can see what that actually looks like. So I'm just going to quickly pivot here. I'm going to just kind of quickly show you those details to see exactly how this attack unfolded. And again, we'll get a chance to do this again, hopefully near the end. So this is the malicious email, the phishing email that we sent out to those users. You can see that we sent it out to all 5 of the users that are within the scope of this simulation with this nasty little macro-enabled Excel file, which is it says invoice on it. So we've sent that along to the users. Okay. In both cases, so I'm just going to bring up one of the hosts here. The user has opened that email, and then they have actually launched or double clicked on the Excel file, which is then created that reverse shell. And the way in which we can confirm this, if we just quickly come into Caldera here, just to see, we can see actually on both these servers, victim 1 and victim 2, we actually now have an activated agent sitting in an elevated status, right? So that means that there is actually now operating at the privilege level a PowerShell reverse proxy, for lack of a better term, but HTTP tunnel back to us, and we can start to run commands. Okay, and we've actually already run those commands as well, again, to make sure that we can simulate this incident, because we want to go in and talk about investigating the incident, not necessarily how to attack your victim endpoints or use Caldera. But again, we'll try to get to that at the end if there's time. So I'm just going to very quickly now go into the Defender platform. What you're seeing here is kind of an overview of all of the instances. Now I have done a filter right now to filter all this stuff out, right? And I've done a filter by it's only the last day. I filtered just to include a bunch of different statuses, and you can certainly do that here. If we extended this, because we've done this a number of simulations, if I expand that out, you're going to see a whole bunch of different instances coming in. So this is kind of what your view would look like when you come into this platform. And again, you can sort by severity, you can sort by investigation state. You can even add tags, which I've done here, which you're going to be able to filter by if you want to. You get a lot of information kind of right at the get-go. And if you just select one of the instances, you're going to get right away some detail. So if you can think of it from a security operations perspective, and you've got a team that's managing this, they can go in, they can look at an incident, they can very quickly assign themselves. So they're the ones who are actually responsible for doing the investigation, and they can see details around the incident at a very high level. They can see its current status. They can see the categories. Now, these are the MITRE attack categories that have been leveraged by that particular incident or by that attack, and that'll become more relevant as we get into the alerts. You can see all the entities that were impacted, so the devices, the users, the mailboxes, right? You can see a high level of the alerts, and you can even expand out the alerts if you wanted to, just to see them very quickly on the screen here, what alerts were involved with in this particular incident. And again, this is just a snap out. Okay, what we're going to do though is we're going to go into that instant. So we can actually now start to take a look at how your investigation should unfold, what information that you have available to you. And then, of course, what steps you need to take to actually investigate and resolve the incident. Now, fortunately, there's a lot of information that's already been generated, whether you've spawned an auto investigation or not. Right? Again, you may have some devices where you don't want auto investigations happening. You still have the full details. So what we would refer to as as really the detection and response piece, the EDR piece, the full details of what's happened during the attack. It's just simply that certain things have not been investigated, right? Files haven't been investigated, IPs haven't been investigated by Microsoft to determine whether or not they were malicious or not, which is why within this alert, have two different, or sorry, this investigation, we have those two different setups for victim server 1 and victim server 2. And the reason we have that is to show that that data is still there, but you're going to see a number of alerts that are not identified as malicious, or that have not been remediated, or there's been like an unknown status. And that's because an investigation has not happened. You have to do that investigation manually if you've got it configured that way. But of course, we want to show the other side where the investigation and remediation does happen. So when you're on this screen, you can very quickly see, and this is the summary screen, but you can see a lot of information that's going to help kind of drive your investigation going forward. Of note is you're getting these the MITRE attack categories. Specifically in the techniques, and you'll see this as we get into the individual alerts and what we can see the individual techniques, but you're getting a summary of all the active alerts that you've got. Now you can see here that in this instance, 8 have actually been remediated of those alerts because that's part of the auto investigation that has been done. But we can see there's a number of attack tactics that have been under the various categories. And you can just quickly highlight over to see which particular tactic or sorry, category has been leveraged, and how many alerts are relate specifically to that particular category, right? So we see execution, there's 6. If we go over to credential access, there's 10 alerts. If we come over here to discovery, there's 2 alerts, so on and so forth. Okay, so you've got that kind of snapshot view of all the categories that have been leveraged within this particular attack, and of course that's going to be different depending on the type of attack that it is. Now, as we go in and we start looking at the various alerts and whatnot, you'll be able to get more information on that, and I'll go over that in a second. Okay, you can also see a very quick story of how the alerts had unfolded, or how the attack had unfolded. Right, so kind of like a full description walkthrough of the alerts in kind of a timeline view. And again, you can click over and look at more of these alerts, which is really just going to take you to the alerts tab here. We're not going to do that just yet because I want to stay on this page for a minute. But when we get into the alerts, you'll see a little bit more of this. You can also very quickly see what the scope of the attack is. So who's impacted or what's impacted. In this instance, we again see 2 devices. And I know we saw this on that flyout page that we saw originally, but it's right here for you so you can see it. You can see we've got 2 impacted devices, 5 impacted users, 5 impacted mailboxes. More specifically, if we take a look at the entities, and we can expand this down if we wanted to see the various users, devices, and mailboxes, which we can also see up here. So we're not going to do that yet. What we can very quickly see is a snapshot of where we are, right? We're seeing we've got 2 victim servers here, right? Our 2 entities, and they're sitting at a high risk level. And that, of course, is because they're unpatched. They've got antivirus turned off. Well, they've got real-time protection turned off anyways. And they've actually been involved in a number of different simulation events. So they're seen as high risk. We can also see that we have 1 user here that is also seen as a high-risk threat. This is going to help you to prioritize where you want to start your investigation, right? If you want to start at the device level and start looking maybe at a full history of all the events, not just within the context of this investigation, but maybe going back to other events as well, or events that maybe are not related to the security incident, but you want to follow kind of a full trail. So this gives you kind of that perspective of where you want to start your investigation. Okay. Over to the side again, we can see some of those same high-level details, okay? We can also see some associated incidents. So again, I've run this simulation a number of times against these target machines within this simulation, not just in preparation for this webinar, but also for doing some other demonstrations. So you can see we've got a myriad of associated incidents, and you can actually see here where what those incident IDs are. In this case, we've got 3 of the same incident where we've identified the same file. If we expand this out, you're going to see a lot more incidents going forward, right? You can see why they've been linked, right? Whether that be the same file, or whether or not the command line execution was the same, or whether or not the email content was the same, okay? And these are all different investigations identified. In this case, you're seeing 2 here, because the incident, of course, is 191 for this one and 53 for that one. So it's the incident ID. So you can see very quickly if this is like a repeat kinds of incident. And that's really helpful, particularly if it's something, maybe it's a relatively unknown threat, and you had remediated it previously and you took some steps. Hopefully you've documented that information inside the incident, because of course you can put comments within this platform. So you can pivot to that incident very quickly to see what those remediation and investigation steps were if you had to take any and do anything manual there. You can also get the incident status and seeing where it is. Really important, you can see when the incident first started, but its last activity. So you're seeing that we first saw this yesterday morning, that was May 31st, but the last activity didn't complete until 3:10 in the afternoon. Now this will be really handy for you if you've got an incident that maybe has been kicking around for a long time and maybe was originally rated as low because it was low and slow, and maybe you thought it was a false positive, but suddenly it's high, and you look back and you're saying, well, this actually goes back like 2 months. We've got to do some real investigation here. So it's really handy to have that information handy. Okay. You also have evidence here. Again, you can see the evidence and response tab here. So I'm not going to click into it, but you could quickly pivot to that if you want to see that. You're seeing, however, very quickly on the screen here that you've got several here that were remediated. That's either quarantined, soft deleted, whatever the case may be. You've got a number, in this case, you can see it was 3. You've got a number where you're seeing not found. You're seeing that not found because, again, an investigation was not launched against those entities. That's going to be on victim server 2, where there is no auto investigation. And then a whole bunch of other that have simply been processed and examined as part of the investigation and have been determined to be relatively benign. Okay. All right, so as we go through, there's a number of tabs you have here available to you that you can click into to get more information. Now, I've already actually spun them up top here so that you can actually see them, just because sometimes it can take a while with the amount of data that's been generated for the screens to load, and we're short on time. So I'm just going to quickly click through them and kind of go over what's involved in using each tab. But again, if you just simply click on the alerts tab here, it is actually going to load. Actually, that was pretty quick, so I'm pretty impressed. Okay, so let's go into the alerts tab here. It's the same tab I just had open, sorry, so I'm just going to go there. So when you're in this view, you can see full detail of all the alerts involved within this particular instant. And what you'll notice is a lot of these alerts, they've been grouped together, right? They've been correlated together for various reasons. Sometimes that's going to be because they are the same type of alert, but also you're going to get information as to why those alerts were correlated as part of this overall instant by actually simply looking at the alerts themselves. So for example, one of the alerts that we have up here that I've already expanded is the sensitive credential read. And you can see we've got 2 separate alerts, one for each of the victim servers that we have here, right? And you can see that they've actually been linked for in one case 4 reasons, another case 6 reasons. So there are justifications behind why these alerts are part of this instant, have been correlated to be part of this instant, and are seen as the same instant, are seen as the same type of attack. Okay. When you actually go into, if you just actually, well, I won't go into it right now, I'll just highlight. If you highlight on the particular alert, you can get some really good details here, and it's really handy, right? And we can go right into the alert page, which we're going to do later on. But what you can see is some really good information right out of the get-go here, right? So you can see in this instance, this particular alert has been resolved on this particular endpoint, right? Well, though no classification has been set. You can also see how it was, like, kind of a description of the incident, but you can see what source was detected. In this case, it was EDR, and it was a behavioral analysis. So user behavior analysis or entity behavior analysis that had detected this threat. You'll see as we go into another one that it might be a different service like Office 365 or M365. That has actually done the detection through a different detection technology. Okay, you're also seeing here the category that was leveraged as well as the technique. So again, getting back to MITRE, right? The MITRE attack categories. In this case, it was credential access, but then a number of techniques were used in this particular attack. Now, if you're not familiar with a MITRE attack and you want to get more information, what's really handy here is you can just click on one of these links. It's going to open up that particular technique where you can actually now start to do some more investigation, particularly if you're not very familiar with the type of technique that's being used, or if you want to get an understanding of the threat groups, the advanced threat groups that have or are currently using that particular technique in their attack. So it's going to give you that information to do that research should you need to. Okay. Again, first activity, last activity, you can see in this instance, it was assigned to automation because this particular server is the one that's in that auto investigation group. It's going to give you a description of that alert and your recommended actions, like what you should do as an investigator to help investigate and remediate this threat. And that's true for every alert that you're going to see. You're also going to see the investigation details. Now, in this particular instance, this is an automated investigation. So you can see the investigation ID was there, and you can see that it was remediated, meaning the investigation was done and Defender ATP has done some remediation. Note I said some, not all. As an investigator, you're still going to have to go in and make sure the investigation has been fully remediated, and we're going to actually walk through that process. But the advantage, of course, of using Defender is that the investigation has unfolded. A lot of stuff has been remediated. So as a security operations personnel, you can focus on actually ensuring the incident was fully remediated. So doing the investigation rather than trying to triage alerts, which is what we typically get stuck doing as security operators. Okay, you can also see any associated incident alerts that were associated with the incident just very quickly on the screen, and you can see the reasons that they were linked to this particular instance. So in this instance, we have 17 alerts that are showing the same file within the same instant, right? We're seeing the same device, and you can actually just highlight and you can see the devices there, file similarities, as well as same user credentials that were used as part of this this particular alert. Okay, now if I very quickly go on to the second one here, this is one where everything is going to be the same with the exception of the investigation details, right? There was no automated investigation in this case, right? It's indicating here it was terminated by the system, meaning no investigation has actually taken place. Okay, so that's why you will, when we get into the investigations, you're going to see different evidence levels and whatnot. Okay, now just very quickly, just to kind of highlight this, I'm just going to scroll down to one of the further ones, the alerts further down. Oh, let me just unhighlight that. So I want to just very quickly kind of scroll down. Now, this one is an informational. This means that, and that's because of those 3 users that weren't excluded from the Defender for Office 365 safe attachments and anti-malware policies. They've actually, the malware here has actually been caught. But what I wanted to show you here really was just a couple things. First, I wanted to show you that it's a different source service that's actually done the detection here, right? Still same category for initial access, no techniques, because of course this was caught. But it was Microsoft Defender for Office 365 that has triggered this alert, right? So you're seeing Defender for Office 365, Defender for Endpoint, the alerts correlated together, right? So you're getting that telemetry from all the various different areas within the Defender platform. I also wanted to show you here that's different. In this particular case, it's linked to this alert, but for different reasons, right? Same file, but in this case, it's the malicious malware attachment or the malicious Excel file, the macro-enabled Excel file. We're seeing message ID similarities. We're seeing the same mail message itself. And we're seeing the same or similar email content. So that's why it's this particular, it has been correlated and assigned to this, this incident. Okay, now we could go and click on into one of these alerts to see like the full story, if you would, of the incident. We're going to do that near the end of this, mainly because I want to make sure that we get through the rest, and then it's going to kind of pivot very nicely into how we're going to kind of do some live response actions. So the next, you can go ahead and you can click on the device tab. This is going to give you all the information. Oops, sorry, I should have clicked on the device tab. All the information about your various devices or endpoints that have been involved in this attack, right? So in this case, we only have the 2 endpoints here. And you can very quickly, if you wanted to, just highlight and get some very quick information around the device, right? That's the domain it belongs to, its name, its build, its health status, its IP address info, when it was last seen, which again, if we're talking about mobile devices like laptops and whatnot, that's going to become important. You can dive in deeper if you wanted to see its UAC flags or any of its subject principal names here. You can also see all of the active threats that are currently going against this this particular asset. Now, what I want to point out here is we only have 1 instant currently ongoing, but if we had multiple instances ongoing and this particular endpoint was involved in that, you would, from this screen here, be able to see all of the alerts, not just within the context of this instant, but all the instances. So it gives you kind of that information again to see if you need to broaden your investigation. Okay. Now from here, you can actually take a couple of actions, like remediation actions, if you wanted to. We're not going to do this here, but you certainly could. You could isolate the device. You could go hunt for events from the device. You could restrict app execution, run an antivirus scan, trigger an investigation package collection, initiate some live response activities, which we'll be doing later on. You can even initiate an automated investigation if you want to from here, okay? And then if you've got any pending actions, they're going to appear here in the Action Center, so you can go in there and again, that might be soft deleting the emails if you're in the mailbox side, or in this instance, if you've done a collection, an investigation package and you want to download that collection, okay? But you can also open the device page, which is what I've done over here, just to give you kind of a little bit more of a broad understanding of how you can pivot and broaden your investigation. So when you click on the device page, you're going to see very quickly information about the device that's really going to be pertinent to your investigation, right? Things like its risk level. We can see this particular asset has a high risk level, but it's also got a really high exposure level, right? There's 57 security recommendations that are being made, over 108 vulnerabilities, and that's because the Defender for Endpoint agent is actually collecting vulnerability status as well as software inventory, which we'll get into in a second. You can see who is logged on to the device, who's most frequent and who's less frequent, which is pretty handy from here. Okay, you can also dive into the alerts specifically for this device. And again, this is going beyond the context of the current incident and actually taking a look at all of the incidents, all of the alerts that have been generated for this incident. We can go back far back. Right now we're doing 30 at a time. We can choose different columns. We can filter this one, like maybe we just wanted to filter based on high, so that's what we're going to focus on. So we're seeing kind of like the full event history, if you would, for this particular asset. Really handy, however, is what we can see in the timeline. So the timeline is going to show you not just the alerts, but all other events that maybe have not necessarily triggered an event, but have actually may be related to that event, right? So for example, let's see if I can scroll down and find it very quickly here, because I want to make sure that we are moving quickly. But there is a network event where we see an outbound call to the FTP server. I just don't think I'm seeing it here. You'll have to take my word for it, because we are running out of time. It is in there, but what you would see is that the passwords were dumped from memory, and then very quickly thereafter there was an FTP connection that had gone out to our malicious FTP server. That's going to appear in the timeline here. And again, there may have been some events that were not caught by Defender because they're relatively innocuous, but as an investigator, you want more information so you can see what's happening. And maybe you can see something that either Defender didn't catch or was just so low and slow that Defender didn't care about it, but you as an investigator do, or maybe you want to just make note of that. Maybe you'll see something here like a user's permission was changed to give them local admin, for example. So you're going to see that event within the timeline here. So it's giving you all of the events from the endpoint or within the context of the alerts that have been generated. So you're actually able to see that kind of full history there. You're also, again, able to pivot very quickly within the same screen. You're able to see all of the vulnerabilities, or sorry, all the recommendations that are being made to harden this device, right? We're seeing update Chrome, update Microsoft's server, enable automatic updates. So all the things that we should be doing anyways, but these are the recommendations for improving the security of this particular asset. We can also see the software inventory. So maybe this particular attack was Excel, but maybe the another attack is going to leverage a vulnerability in Firefox, for example. And we're seeing we've got that vulnerability there. So we really should have prevented that, but at least we're getting the software inventory and we can see kind of if there's any weaknesses here. In this case, you can see the weaknesses are associated with Windows Server because we haven't actually patched it. You can also see all of the vulnerabilities that are associated with this particular asset. Again, you can sort any which way. You can sort by highest CVS score or lowest CVS score pretty easily here, so you can identify the highest criticality CVEs, and then maybe make a determination that a particular CVE was the reason why you were exploited in the first place. Obviously, that's not in this case, but certainly that information will be available to you. And then you can see any of the missing security updates, so KBs that are there. Here we see we're missing too. We should probably patch the machine to prevent this from happening again in the future. Okay. We're going to run out of time, so I'm going to move quickly here. We're going to leave this open because we're going to come back to this screen to do some live action, some live response actions near the end of the webinar here. So going back to the instance screen, the next area that we can get on to get some information about our investigation is find out information about our users. So who were the users that were involved within this particular instance? What were their email addresses? But again, and very cool here is we can see the investigation priority, right? And that's going to, again, help focus your where you want to start your investigation. Here we can see we've got the E5 user 1. It's got a high investigation priority. So if we click on that, just to highlight it very quickly, we can see some very quick level information about that user. We can see that they've got a relatively low identity risk, which is good, right? But we can also see that there's 12 active alerts against this person. We can see that they are a sensitive user because they've got access to sensitive information through AIP. And if you're not familiar with AIP, we can talk about that later. But also they're a domain admin within the organizational domain. So they've been identified as a sensitive user here, which was why we want to investigate it. Now we can go ahead and open up the user page from here if we wanted to get more details. I've already done that over here. And when we do that, this brings us into to a screen which gives us a little bit more information about this particular user, right? We can see the risk score, how many risk activities that they've got. In this instance, we're seeing within the last 7 days, there's been one risky event where in this case it was the credentials accessing the AD sync server. We can see their compromise score, right? We can see their score over the last few weeks. We can see details down the side, particularly about this user, but we can also take some actions, right? We can confirm that the user is compromised, and that's going to, if you're using conditional access, that will go into enabling the user to self-remediate to still maintain access while locking out the bad guys. We can also require the user to sign in again, so we can log them out and force them to re-sign in. And we can suspend the user if this is like a highly privileged user, like maybe it's a global admin and a domain admin like we have here, and we think we've got some high risk, we can immediately suspend that user, which is really handy. We can also pivot if we wanted to Azure AD to take a look at what their account settings are. We can see all of the files that they own, and we can see all of the files that have been shared with this user that they have access to. So it's giving us really a good scope of this particular user. High priority, we probably want to investigate this person to make sure that they have not been compromised. Okay, moving back to instance here, we then have the Mailboxes tab. Okay, and the Mailboxes tab, very similar to the other tabs, is going to give you a history of all the mailboxes that were involved in this attack. Now, this looks the same. The mailboxes look the same as the users. In this instance, it does, but keep in mind, most organizations, they're going to have other mailboxes, like a finance accounts payable inbox, as an example, or maybe a help desk inbox, right, which are going to be shared mailboxes. And so those would, if they were involved within the scope of this particular attack, they would also be listed here as well, because the emails came through there. Okay, now if you go and you highlight any of these mailboxes, just like before, you're going to get some high level details. The alerts are going to take a while to load up here, but you'll see all the alerts for this particular user, right, that you're seeing here. Beyond, again, it's the context of the user, not specifically to this investigation. We're looking at these alerts because they're talking about active alerts. So in this particular user, we can see that there's been some e-discovery searches that have been started previously. We can see that there's been email messages where malware has been removed after delivery, meaning that the user could have clicked on it. That would be this case, right? So you're seeing some details about the user, but you can also, again, you can go to that particular mailbox page, which is going to open Explorer, which I've already done here, and you can see details behind the particular user. Now, in this case, I'm looking at the E5 user. We can see all of the emails that have been delivered over the last period of time. We can see which ones were malicious. We can see which ones were successfully delivered versus ones that were delivered to junk versus ones that were actually blocked or held back. So you've got that kind of view right there. And this is great because you can pivot, and if you wanted to straight from here, you could start hunting for other emails, which is different than the advanced hunting that we'll show in a few minutes there, but you'll be able to find other emails maybe with similar attachments or similar subjects, whatever the case may be. So you can, again, start to expand your investigation. Okay, back to the instance tab. I'm going to skip over investigations for now and go straight to the evidence tab. Okay. This is all the evidence that's been collected as part of the incident. Now, you're going to see two different levels of evidence. One for the auto investigation, whereby a whole bunch of files and processes were examined and determined to be either having a threat, not having a threat, or being relatively benign. Okay, and then you're going to see the other side of it was where an investigation has not automatically happened, in which case you're just going to see a bunch of unknowns. Right? It's unknown because, hey, it's the behavioral analysis is flagged. This is suspicious activity, but no investigation has actually been automatically generated there, which means you would have to do that investigation on your own. I'm going to go quickly here because I really want to make sure that we get to the investigations piece and then the alerts and remediation piece. But you can see here just very quickly kind of a summary of all the evidence that's been collected as part of this as part of this incident. You'll see some of this replicated when we look at investigations. For example, you can see here we've got one malicious IP address, assuming that's going to load, take some time. Now that's our malicious FTP server, don't forget, right? We saw that before. We can get details about that if we want by highlighting it. We can go hunt straight from here, specifically for this IP address or similar IP addresses if we wanted to. We can also add it to a block list for that, or an allow list. So if we wanted to stop this in the future, and you'll see this as well when we get into the investigation, that you can also add, or sorry, when we get into the alerts, you can add indicators, which will stop subsequent attacks from, say, similar IP addresses or similar files, whatever the case, or sorry, same files, from actually taking place. Again, especially if it's something that's an unknown type of threat. You can see the emails that were involved. You can see the email clusters. Clusters is just the groups of emails that have been clustered together because of the same subject or similar attachment or whatever the case may be. Okay, you're seeing a couple here that have been delivered, right? So these are the two that actually got through. So, it actually got through for the user 5, for example. But then these other ones that have been flagged simply as suspicious, but you'll see in the investigation they'll have actually been caught. Okay, I'm going to very quickly pivot to the investigation. I want to show you here that we have a number of investigations that have been triggered. Okay, some were automatic even though we didn't specify, and these are the ones that are for Defender for Office 365, right? So where mail has come in this case, you're seeing it to the three. This represents the mail to the 3 users, and it's basically being held and waiting on an approval here for soft delete, right? So it's basically already held those. Now we can go in and investigate. Maybe we find actually this has been a benign instance. We're going to release those to the users, or we can do a soft delete or a hard delete straight from there. We also have 3 other investigations. One, which has a remediation status of remediated, and that was on victim server 1. So that's the one that's got the full automatic investigation. We also have the other 2 instances for the other server, and you're seeing 2 because no investigation has been done for either of those. You can see that they're terminated. And what you'll notice is in this investigation, both the hack tool and credential read were associated together because they were investigated and seen within that instance to be related. Where in this instance with the one where there was no automatic investigation, it's just still seen as 2 separate investigations because there's been no conclusion that Defender has drawn there because no investigation has happened. So there's no way of actually correlating those 2 particular investigations as part of the same investigation. Okay, I'm going to quickly go into this investigation here. Just very quickly there. You can very quickly see investigation details if you wanted to. You can get details again around the actual alert, the alert recommended actions, similar to what you would see within the alert screen there. But if we go into the investigation page itself, which is what we're going to do now, I'll wait for it to load here. And what you'll see is you'll get a lot of details around the investigation in terms of how it unfolded. I'm just going to refresh my screen here because it seems to be hanging a little bit. Okay, so right at the first screen that we're going to see is we see this investigation graph, and it's basically telling you, giving you kind of almost like a dashboard, if you would, of how that investigation unfolded, right? We can see in this instance that one device was involved in this particular investigation. There were 7 correlated alerts to the original alert received, specifically around, in this case, Mimikatz hack tool, right? Which is that's the password dumper, if you would, for lack of a better term. We've got evidence here that has been collected. We can see the device waited before it remediated, so there was a delay here. Now, if we saw here that there was waiting for approval, so maybe this was an investigation where we wanted the remediation actions to be approved. Someone would come in here and then approve it, and then it would go to remediate. But we could also see that 7 entities in this case were remediated, and we'll get into that in just a second. We can also see though all the entities that were analyzed, right? So over 2,300 files were analyzed, and 3 were found to be malicious and remediated. 120 processes, 226 servers, so on and so forth. 12 IP addresses, 246 persistence minutes. So that's all been collected as evidence, which is available here in the evidence tab as well. Okay, so this is we're seeing really kind of like a high level of how the automatic investigation unfolded here. We can also, again, from this particular screen here, we can see all of the alerts that were correlated together. You saw that kind of in the investigation graph back here, right? The 7 alerts that were correlated with the original alert that was received, right? And you're seeing that here where you're seeing Mimikatz was actually prevented, or in this case was actually quarantined. It was quarantined after the memory dump, again, because of the way we've got the environment configured, real-time protection turned off, no attack surface reduction rules. But we are seeing that it was quarantined here, okay? And it's actually saying that there. Now, that'll become more evident when we actually get into the evidence, but you're seeing all the alerts that were involved within this particular investigation, okay? Again, we can see the devices. We can pivot directly to the device if we wanted to, open it up, go to the device page. I'm not going to do that because we've already got it opened here. Okay, you can also see all of the evidence that was collected, right? So in this instance, we're seeing a detailed list of some of the evidence that was collected. We're seeing in this instance that Mimikatz was found and it was remediated. We're also seeing this file here, which is part of the Mimikatz package. It was previously discovered down here and remediated. So when it checked again as part of the execution process, it was no longer found because it was already quarantined. So that's kind of important to note here. And you also notice there's a number of files here in which there's no threats found, right? So Mimikatz, this particular piece of malware, it leverages a bunch of Windows files, right? So these Windows files are actually all legitimate files. Now there is a file in here that if you don't recognize, which is our dropper, and you'll find in this particular instance there's been no threats found. Again, just to re-highlight that in this particular instance we're using that reverse shell. We've got a bunch of stuff turned on that would prevent this from ever executing to begin with. But this is going to be important when we actually get into the alerts itself and look at some of the additional remediation actions actions that need to be taken. Now, one of the reasons this was not caught, obviously, is it's never been seen before, and it wasn't seen to be doing anything really directly malicious simply because of how it was operating. But we may want to flag that in the future. And as you see, as we go through the alerts, we're going to see where we see there is some malicious activity here that we still need to remediate. You're also going to go, again, a full history, if you would, of all the entities. And again, no different than the investigation graph, but now you can dive in, right? You can see all of the files, and I could dive into those files. So it's going to take quite a while to load because there's quite a few of them that 3 were remediated. Actually, I'm curious if I actually go in there, how quickly it will load. So I actually wrote it quickly. So you can see there were 3 that were remediated, but you can see the rest of the ones that were actually investigated as part of this threat. And of course, we're limiting right now to 30 items a page. We could page through if we wanted to, right? We could also export this stuff if we wanted to. We could see all the processes that were identified. And investigated as part of this. We can see all the IP addresses. So we got that. We've got that full detail of evidence specifically for this investigation. We can also see a log of the investigation itself, right? So this is how the investigation actually unfolded. So we wanted to make sure that if things were covered off or things weren't missed, or if maybe there was another step that we wanted to, or maybe there was something that was skipped down here, we want to find out why. We could click in and get some details around that. Right, so we can actually see the full log of the incident that was happening. Now, if I go back to, sorry, the investigation that was happening. Now, if I go back to the investigation here, so I'm just going to go quickly back to the investigation, and I click on one of these other ones, which is the one of the investigations that actually, where no investigation actually took place. So if I go into that one, you're going to see I've got a lot less detail, which means I've got a lot more manual investigation that I need to do here, which is why Microsoft recommends as best practice, and so would we, that you always turn on automatic investigation, even if you turn remediation off. So you've got that, so that you don't have to do this investigation yourself, or at least not all of the investigation yourself. So again, you're seeing here much less detail here. We can see the correlated alerts. We can see the entities that were analyzed here. But if we go over to these entities, what you're going to see is of these files, there's actually not going to be any verdict, and that's because an investigation didn't happen. We had auto investigation turned off for this particular endpoint. So again, that's practice, turn it on, unless you want to be going and investigating all this stuff manually, which I can tell you is no fun. You can also see, again, the log of how this investigation unfolded. And what you'll see very quickly here is one of the first things that it checked is whether or not the machine was covered by auto investigation. In this case, it was skipped because we know, right, that it's actually not covered. So no investigation has taken place. So if you ever see this and you're using Defender, you know that maybe you've got an endpoint group that somebody's configured, maybe for testing, where auto investigation was turned on, or maybe your tenant's configured incorrectly and you want to go back and check that. But if you see this, you know you've got a lot more manual investigation that you're going to have to do. Okay, we're not going to do that manual investigation today because there's simply not enough time. Trust me though when I say the evidence is still there. It is doing a full recording of all the events that are happening on that endpoint, and you'll see that when we pivot back to the alerts. Okay. All right, so let's go back to the first investigation there. Just wait for it to load again. Actually, do I have it up here? Oh, I've got it up here. Okay, well, we're seeing it's remediated. So this is telling us that this investigation, it remediated a portion of the incident. Now, of course, we know we've got that other asset that has no auto investigation. So obviously manual investigation is going to be needed there. But just because something's been remediated doesn't mean we're done. Okay, because you know what we want Defender to do is to take all the heavy lifting off of us. We're investigating instance, but we need to confirm that this incident has been properly remediated, right? Because not everything is going to be a well-known threat. A lot of things are going to be unknown threats. You're still going to need to take some action as a SecOps person in order to make sure that the incident has been fully contained. All right. So in this instance, we're going to go back to alerts here. Okay, and I've already dumped into the alerts on the victim server. I'm using victim server 1 here, and the reason being, again, if you haven't done an auto investigation, if that's turned off, you actually can't do any of those live response options. So or collect an investigation package. So just a little note, again, make sure you're using automated investigation even if you don't have automated response. But if I've clicked onto alert, and actually I'll just quickly show this in action just so you can see what this looks like. If I go back to the alerts and I click on the alerts, I'm just going to click on one of these and I'll pivot back. So if I go into this alert and I just very quickly click on that sensitive credential read, it's going to take me into the full story of that alert. This is the same screen you were seeing. And I can see how the entire attack unfolded from a process execution, file download, and exfiltration perspective, right? So if I'm just going to quickly walk through the incident here so we can see that, how this particular attack unfolded, and then if we need to take some additional remediation action, right? So what we can see here, and again, we're going to go through this quickly because we know how the attack unfolded because we're the ones who are simulating the attack. But if we were coming in as a SecOps person, what we're going to see here is that Outlook was connected to a suspicious PowerShell command that was launched by from XL exe, right? So if we want to find out what specifically it was, we can see that this is where we see that malicious Excel file being launched by XL, and then as part of that, it's launching some suspicious Office commands. In this instance, what it's doing is we know it's actually creating a couple PowerShell scripts to try to get an elevated command prompt. Now, I've named this execute elevated PS1 so that we can easily see it. But when you're coming through, what you would normally do is you would expand that out and you'd want to get details about what actually was run here. In this case, it's telling us that PowerShell was executed to run an actual script. And if we wanted to, we could actually download a copy of that script if we wanted to go ahead and pull it down. We could also submit it for deep analysis. We could add an indicator if we want. We can go to the file page and see whether or not that particular file is available if we wanted details of it. So if we could broaden our investigation, we could even go hunt for this particular one. In this instance, because we're short on time, we're going to keep walking down the process tree here. Okay, so what we've seen is this PowerShell then and you can see some inspection here, but it spawned off another PowerShell process here. And this PowerShell process in this instance launched a remote shell. So that's the PowerShell that's actually going to, from our attack, is kicking off the downloading of the agent. Now, if we expand this out, one of the things I want to point out here, if we quickly go up to this top PowerShell here where we see it here, we're seeing these are being executed as an elevated command, meaning they're sitting in an elevated status, right? We have PowerShell that's running elevated, which is why it can execute Mimikatz without requiring UAC in this instance. Okay, just so that you're aware. So you always want to pay attention as you're going through the process to see what was their execution details and were they sitting in an elevated status, right? Generally, that's going to happen if you got someone who's running as local admin or somebody's been able to elevate their privilege there. So again, we can see in this instance that PowerShell launched another script here. We can again download that script if we wanted to see what it happens. But we can see that this particular PowerShell script, if we scroll down, it actually created or downloaded a file. In this instance, now we simply know because we're the ones who actually created it. But this executable is the malicious executable that's going to go and actually establish that reverse tunnel to us, right? So we can see here that it's been downloaded, and again, we can get details on it if we want. If we move down to see where this file that was downloaded or created was now executed, we can see it was executed, and this is something to take note of, right? We are seeing now that outbound connection to this IP address on port 888, right? So this is the command that was run, and we can see again the executable here, and we can see what was referenced in the command line. Now, the reason why this is obviously important is we are seeing that outbound threat. Now, this is on the same subnet as I pointed to earlier. That's just to make it easier to launch attacks from Caldera. However, this would normally be flagged as something suspicious if it was on a different subnet. And again, if we had attack surface reduction rules and real-time protection turned on in these instances, it wouldn't have launched in the first place. But again, we're trying to simulate here. Well, what you can see is you've got this outbound connection, and it's an HTTP outbound connection. So we've got that tunnel established. So that is something to take note of. Right? We're going to want to make sure that we cover that off. So we're going to flag that in our heads to come back and do some remediation looking for that. But we can also see the command line that was executed. So like that full command line if we wanted to, just by highlighting on that alert, and that's important. Okay. Now, once this is executed and we've got that outbound HTTP tunnel happening, we can see that it spawned a bunch of additional PowerShell processes. One to do the execution bypass, so you get away from that execution restrictions that PowerShell will have. We can see that the history has been cleared, so that's an attacker trying to cover their tracks. And then we can also see this command. Now, this is the big command that's actually pulling down Mimikatz, unpacking it, and then running it, downloading the credentials, and exfiltrating them. Okay, now it's been done in all one command, and again, you can, if you wanted to, you could copy this command out, and you could paste it into, like a notepad or whatnot if you wanted to break out the command, because in this instance, it's a series of commands. But as we walk through, we can see a number of files were created. So this is the downloading and unpacking of Mimikatz, right? All the creation. We can then see the execution. In this case, again, the command here, we're seeing here that Mimikatz is being used to exfiltrate the long passwords to a file. You're seeing all the detections here and all the files that were used as part of Mimikatz being executed there. And I'm just going to shrink that down. And right after Mimikatz is launched, we can see we've got this living off the land alert here, which is showing us there's been an outbound connection. And again, that outbound connection is going to that remote FTP. Now, this would obviously be normally an external FTP. So we know that we've now had some sort of successful exfiltration. No way of actually mitigating that once it's gone, but at least we're aware of it. So we can now find out the users. We can go back if we needed to the endpoints, figure out what passwords were actually exfiltrated, and then get those users to reset their passwords. So it's handy to know that. And again, normally this wouldn't have actually even kicked on if you've got those attack surface reduction rules. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to scroll back up very quickly, and we're going to look at this this Gonna Getcha exe. So that's our tunnel here that we're going to look at, okay? And we've also had another network connection that we know about for FTP. So we know we've got some stuff that we're not done yet, even though the defender said that the investigation that's part of this incident has been remediated. There's more work for us to do, right? We're still investigating this incident. We found out that there may be some things that we want to look at. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip over here to a live session. So this is, if you came into like devices, for example, and you clicked on initiate live response session, this is going to launch us into that live response session. And again, I'm going to remind you that in this particular instance, if you don't have auto investigation turned on, don't have to worry about remediation, but auto investigation, you're not going to be able to do live response. So always turn it on. I cannot stress that enough. Okay. So what we want to do, we know that we've got those network connections. So maybe we want to go ahead and take a look to see, well, are any of those network connections still active, or do we need to take some action here? So very quickly, we're just going to go into the live response, and we're going to type in connections just to get a list of all the connections that are currently active on. Oh, I'm going to have to restart this session. Hang on. That are currently active on the device. Just give it a second there to launch the live session. I launched it earlier, so just 1 second there. I'm going to have to refresh. There we go. All right, as we can see here, we are now connected to victim server. We're actually live on the host here. And as we had talked about, what we want to do is we want to actually see if we still have any of those outbound connections to that Gonna Getcha file, or through that, sorry, that Gonna Getcha executable, to see if it is still live. Do we still have that live connection? So I'm just going to quickly type in connections here. What that's going to command is going to go back to the live host, and is going to pull back all those connections that are currently active on the device. You can see we actually do still have that outbound connection, right, going to that IP on port 8888, and that was the one, of course, that we identified in the full trace of the alerts that was malicious. Now, just before I continue here, I just want to show you that you can come in here and look at the log of all the commands that you have issued in the live response. Once it's come up, you can actually see as well. You can just kind of highlight it, and you can see the output from it. And if you've got a lot of output that that's coming from these commands, which you'll probably see when we go through the processes, you can actually just open that up in another tab there. It's going to bring you to this screen here, and with the full details of all the output from that command. And again, it's recording that kind of full log of that command. Okay, so we can see we do still have that active process running, that active connection going outbound. So the next thing that we need to do then is quite frankly, we need to remediate it, right? So we want to take a look specifically at that process. Let's get some details around it, and then take some actions on that to terminate that connection and hopefully, remove that file, quarantine that file. So the next command that we're going to issue here is going to be processes. We're just going to get the actual process itself, or details around that process. Just looking up the process ID here, which we have, it looks like it's 7424. So we'll let that command run for a second there. And when that command runs, it's going to pull back all the details about that process. It comes in a JSON format here. We can get details around it, where that executable is currently stored, like its path, for example, when it was created. So all the details, if we wanted to, again, we've got this in the command log if we wanted to take this information and further our investigation, maybe look and do some hunting or whatnot on some of the information that's kind of revealed here. So we know we've got that active process. We know that I've got that active connection. So the next thing we want to do is actually remediate that. So we're going to type in the command remediate, followed by the process, and then we're going to enter that process ID again. And what that process is going to do, and I'm just going to copy that process ID 7424. And what that's going to do is that's actually going to terminate the connection. It's going to stop the process and quarantine that file. So that file will be available for later if we wanted to download it, for example. basically eliminating that particular file from being risky on this host. Now, what we're going to do just to confirm that actually has completed, we want to go ahead and run this command again, just to make sure that that process actually has been terminated, that the file has been remediated. In this instance, you're saying that process was not found on the system, so that means we have effectively remediated that file. But just to double check, let's take a look at the connections again, just to make sure that we don't still have some sort of outbound connection there, or that the process has not, or another process hasn't launched trying to continually establish that connection. You can see here that the Gonna Getcha exe is no longer appears here. You see no outbound connection on port 8888 to that IP address. So we have successfully now remediated that particular portion of this incident. Now there's a couple of other things that we still need to do. As remember from our investigation, we also did have within the investigation, actually I'm going to go back to the investigations here, sorry. Back there. Just very quickly to the investigations, because we have a couple other investigations that are actually waiting for approval, right? So those are the ones by from Office 3 Defender, sorry, for 365, right, where they're simply waiting for us to do a soft delete if we wanted to. So we go into the investigation page. Again, we can see details, and I won't go over that again, but we can see that there was the one file that was malicious. But we've got some pending actions here, right? In this case, the pending actions are to remove the emails and the associated files. Now we can choose if we wanted to just remediate. We could just remove the email, we could just remove the attachment, or we could remove everything. In this case, I'm going to actually remove everything. So I'm just going to select them. Oops, sorry. Go ahead and select them all. And I'm just going to go ahead and approve. And what that's going to do is now Microsoft is Defender is going to go through the mailboxes, remove the emails, remove the attachments, even if it's sitting in junk or deleted. So now that we've done that, we've remediated the instance, we can go back into, the other investigations, we can go back into the instance if we wanted to. And if we're relatively comfortable, we've properly managed that or properly remediated this instance, we can now mark this instance as resolved, and we can give it a status. In this case, I'm going to give a status to say true alert. I'm going to give it the determination that this happened to be, in this case, security personnel, so or security testing. I was doing testing, right? And now that's going to be tracked as part of that incident going forward. All right, as I feared, there's not time to actually go through and show how the actual attack was deployed. We'll look at maybe recording a supplemental session to this that we can send out to you that shows how that attack was deployed kind of going forward. Maybe we'll even add on those live response actions. And again, that particular investigation had concluded, so it looks like that entity, the Gonna Getcha exe, was actually remediated before we could actually do the live response action. But hopefully you got an idea of how you'd actually go through and maybe look for some of those other instances. With that, we are actually officially out of time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, David, for the great presentation. For all your questions, and we are going to answer it after the event. So this concludes the webinar, and thank you all for attending. We hope you have learned and enjoyed this presentation. Thank you, everyone.